she held her son's hand at his father's funeral. A few months later, she published a children's book, meant to help her boys process their grief, to give them words for a pain too big to understand. But Kouri Richins already knew exactly how their father died, because she was the one who killed him. This is the story of a Utah mother, a fentanyl overdose disguised as a tragic accident, and a cover-up so calculated that even her own children became part of the lie. Eric and Kouri Richins seemed from the outside like a family living the dream. Married with 3 young sons, they lived in Kamas, Utah, a quiet community near Park City, surrounded by mountains and the kind of small-town familiarity where everyone knows everyone. Eric worked in home building and real estate, a business the couple ran together. To friends and neighbors, they were a normal family, busy with kids' sports, weekend trips, the everyday rhythm of suburban life. But behind that image, the Richins' finances were unraveling. Their real estate ventures had taken on significant debt, and prosecutors would later allege that Eric was beginning to ask hard questions about money that didn't add up and about properties Kouri may have used without his full knowledge. In early March 2022, just days before Eric's death, the couple celebrated his birthday with a trip to Park City, a getaway that, on the surface, looked like nothing out of the ordinary. What happened next would unravel everything anyone thought they knew about this family, and expose a side of Kouri Richins that even those closest to her never saw coming. On the night of March 4, 2022, Eric and Kouri were staying at a rental property in Park City, celebrating his birthday with their sons. By all accounts, it had been a normal family evening. The next morning, Kouri called 911. She told dispatchers that Eric wasn't breathing, that she'd woken up and found him unresponsive beside her. Paramedics arrived and pronounced him dead at the scene. For Kouri, the explanation seemed almost too cruel to question. Eric, a healthy man in his late 30s, had apparently died in his sleep. She told family and friends it must have been his heart. Maybe an undiagnosed condition, maybe just terrible luck. And at first, that's exactly how it was treated. A devastating, sudden loss. The kind of story that makes headlines for a day and then fades. A young father gone too soon, a wife and 3 boys left to grieve. Friends rallied around Kouri. Donations poured in for the family. She spoke to local news about her husband's sudden death, describing her shock and heartbreak. But behind the scenes, something didn't sit right with the medical examiner's office. An autopsy was ordered. Standard procedure for an unexpected death of a relatively young, seemingly healthy man. And when the toxicology results came back weeks later, they revealed something no one expected. Eric Richins hadn't died of a heart attack. He had a lethal amount of fentanyl in his system. A lethal dose of fentanyl. In a man with no known history of drug use, no prescription for opioids, and no reason, on paper, to have the drug anywhere near him. For investigators, this single detail changed everything. What had been treated as a tragic, natural death was now being looked at as a potential homicide. Detectives began retracing the days before Eric's death. And what they found didn't just raise questions about how he died. It raised questions about why. It turned out Eric had recently grown suspicious about the couple's finances. Their real estate business was carrying significant debt, and Eric had reportedly started asking for access to financial records. Records that Kouri had been managing largely on her own. According to prosecutors, Eric was beginning to uncover discrepancies. Money missing, properties refinanced or sold without his knowledge, and signs that Kouri may have forged his signature on financial documents. On top of that, Eric had a substantial life insurance policy, one that had reportedly been increased not long before his death. Then came another detail that investigators couldn't ignore. In the days surrounding Eric's death, cell phone and purchase records allegedly placed Kouri in contact with someone who could supply fentanyl, and showed her researching lethal doses of the drug. Piece by piece, the picture investigators were building looked less like a grieving widow and more like someone with motive, opportunity, and a plan. In May 2022, about 2 months after Eric's death, Kouri Richins was arrested and charged with his murder. The grieving widow the community had rallied around was now accused of being the person who killed him. But here's the detail that turned this case from shocking to almost unbelievable. In the months after Eric's death, while she was still publicly grieving, while the investigation into her was already quietly underway, Kouri Richins wrote and published a children's book. It was meant to help kids cope with the loss of a parent. A gentle, comforting story for children processing grief. Illustrated, warm, designed to sit on a shelf next to other books about loss and healing. She gave interviews about it, talked about wanting to help other families going through what hers had been through. She read it to her own sons, the same sons whose father she is accused of poisoning. Think about what that means. While authorities were building a case that she had killed Eric, Kouri was standing in front of cameras, presenting herself as a widow turned advocate, someone trying to turn unimaginable pain into something meaningful for other grieving children. If the charges against her are true, she wasn't just hiding a murder. She was profiting, emotionally, publicly, from a tragedy she created. And she was doing it in front of the very children who lost their father because of her. It's the kind of detail that, once you know it, makes you go back and look at everything else in this story completely differently. The trial of Kouri Richins became one of the most closely watched cases in Utah in years, and the evidence presented painted a picture far darker than the grieving widow narrative she'd spent months building. Prosecutors laid out a timeline showing Kouri had allegedly researched fentanyl and its effects in the days before Eric's death. They presented financial records showing the extent of the debt she'd hidden from him, along with documents prosecutors said had been altered or signed without his knowledge. Witnesses testified about Eric growing suspicious in his final days, telling people close to him that something wasn't right with the business finances, and that he planned to look into it further. The defense pushed back hard, arguing the evidence was circumstantial, that there was no direct proof Kouri administered the fentanyl, and that another explanation for Eric's death couldn't be ruled out entirely. But prosecutors countered with what they called the clearest motive of all. Eric was about to discover the truth about the money, and once he did, everything Kouri had built, including the insurance payout and control over the business, would be at risk. Throughout the trial, Kouri maintained her composure in court, often appearing calm and even tearful at different moments. Behavior prosecutors suggested was simply another performance, consistent with someone who had already shown she could grieve publicly while hiding the truth. After weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. The jury's deliberation didn't take long. Kouri Richins was found guilty of murdering her husband Eric, along with charges related to the forged financial documents and the scheme prosecutors said she'd built to cover her tracks. At her sentencing, Kouri was given the opportunity to speak. And in front of the court, in front of the family she'd torn apart, she maintained her innocence. She told the judge and her own children that she did not do this, that she was not the person responsible for their father's death. For Eric's family, who had sat through weeks of testimony, hearing her deny it one final time was its own kind of gut punch. They had already lost Eric. Now they were watching the person responsible refuse to even acknowledge what she'd done, in front of the three boys who would grow up without their father, raised in part by the woman convicted of killing him. The judge handed down a sentence that will keep Kouri Richins in prison for the rest of her life. The grief book she once promoted as a tool for healing now sits as one of the most chilling pieces of evidence in the entire case. A public performance of grief written by the person who caused it. What makes the Kouri Richins case so unsettling isn't just the murder itself. It's everything that came after. The funeral, the interviews, the book, the image of a devoted mother helping her sons heal from a loss she herself caused. It's a reminder that the people closest to us, the ones we'd never suspect, are sometimes capable of things we can't imagine. And that grief, real or performed, can be the perfect disguise. Eric Richins trusted his wife with his finances, his family, his future. And in the end, that trust cost him his life. Somewhere, three boys are growing up without their father, and with a mother who even now refuses to tell them the truth. So here's the question. Do you think Kouri Richins will ever admit what she did to her own sons? Let me know in the comments. If you found this case as disturbing as I did, make sure to subscribe, because there's a lot more where this came from.